Former CBS News Moscow bureau chief Beth Knobel is here with us. Beth, what do you think of Putin's comments warning of those serious consequences? Is that just Putin speak for we're going to do something?
Not in this case. There actually are some pretty serious economic consequences that could come out of this. The #1 destination for Russian tourists wanting to leave the country is Turkey. Or maybe it was #2 after Egypt, but now Russian tourists aren't going to go to Egypt anymore after that Russian airliner was taken down apparently by a bomb. So Turkey is a huge Russian tourist destination. And already this morning, there are tour companies in Russia that are saying they're going to suspend their operations in Turkey. That is millions of people and millions of dollars going into the Turkish economy.
Well, so since Turkey is a NATO member, could this actually further strain relations as well between Russia and the West?
It certainly could. I think a lot of people were saying at the time that Russia decided to go into Syria at the end of September that the worst case scenario was some kind of conflict between NATO forces and Russian forces, and that's already happened only about 2 months in. It's not really clear what's going to happen, but there's a lot of people in those skies right now, and NATO and the Russians have to figure out a way to avoid this kind of confrontation if they want to create any kind of meaningful partnership to make some progress towards peace in Syria.
Beth, at the same time, some would say this maybe isn't a surprise. You've had Russian jets antagonizing NATO, coalition U.S. forces and ships and airspace for a long time now. It seemed like they were flirting with provoking an incident, whether or not this was conscious or not. That's exactly what's happened here, where there's a claim that a Russian jet went into another country's sovereign airspace, and not the first time they've sort of walked a fine line with sovereignty of other countries.
Well, that's absolutely right. There have been Russian small, let's say they're pushing the envelope all over the world in subs and airspace. This not only goes back to the Cold War, but it really has been happening for many years. So the question is Russia going to stop doing that? Is this a sign that they've been playing with fire and maybe getting away with it, or not? The other thing I'd say is that situation in northern Syria is really very complicated. One of the things that the Turks have been talking about since the Russians went in is that there are Turkish people in northern Syria who have been the subject of Russian bombing. And so Syria complained to the UN even this week saying, hey, Russia, we really don't want to see you taking aggressions against those civilian populations who are Turkish in northern Syria. So this situation is very complicated, and I don't think anybody can quite predict what Russia's going to do about it.
I know. How do we end up sorting all this out?
Well, it's going to take diplomacy. And that's one thing that America has not really been so great with over the past few months. In fact, if you look back going a year and almost 2 years to the Russian taking of Crimea, there has been a lot of strain in this relationship. And it's really not clear how able the two sides are going to be to find some way to work together in Syria. They've actually sort of come back together more than ever because of the Paris attacks. If you had looked at a week ago, it was the first time that maybe there was some togetherness coming together, on Syria. So now it's really not clear what's going to happen next.
Well, and you touched on this here. You've got a real kind of bizarre, politics of bedfellows right now, in that you have much of the world coming to a consensus that something has to be done now against ISIS, which means the U.S., the French, the Russians, NATO allies sort of have to be on the same page. On that front. At the same time, you have the U.S. actively campaigning to continue sanctions against Russia in Ukraine, and Russia having its own concerns after the downing of its jet, and now you have a fighter jet that's been shot down as well. You have a little bit of the enemy of my enemy is my friend going on, and yet you still have some fighting amongst these now sort of friends.
Right. The situation in Syria it's a pot with a lot of chefs throwing ingredients in right now. So the thing to remember about the Russians is, even though they are supporting President Assad, the Syrian leader, a lot of their airstrikes have not been against ISIS. They've been against rebels who are fighting against Assad. And so I think one of the things that the West is likely to do as a part of what's happened today is say, look, do you Russians want to be part of the solution? If that's really true, true, we need to figure out who the real enemy is and all unite against them. And if the enemy is ISIS, then let's all fight ISIS together. Remember that Russia has a significant Muslim population of its own, and they are taking a very risky stance in going into Syria at all because of possible reprisals with their own people.
And does Assad become the bargaining chip for some of that if the U.S. is willing to say, okay, Assad doesn't have to go today. Well, he can stay until elections, but we need you to give us, stop bombing all of his opponents, instead focus on ISIS. Is that common enough ground? Does that let Putin claim a victory and the U.S. claim a victory and the target maybe shift to ISIS, where there's a real threat of them striking either the Western Europe or the U.S. again?
Well, what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that that is the kind of situation that maybe is something that can bring everything together. Putin is looking for some kind of win here. That's why he went into Syria. This is the first time that Russian troops have really gone into a space outside the former Soviet Union since the former Soviet Union fell apart in 1991. This is really an unprecedented situation for them. And so people are saying, well, what does Putin really want? What's a win for him? So maybe a situation where Assad is not immediately pushed out is something that he can hold up to his people and say, yeah, the fact that we were in means that we were able to keep an ally of ours in power. I think a couple of months ago, you didn't really hear a lot of talk amongst Americans about maybe there's a solution where Assad would stay in power for a while. And now you are hearing it. So maybe that's something that has actually come out of the Russian involvement in Syria.
Beth Knobel, thank you.